The WNBA trade deadline has passed. Where do the Washington Mystics stand? The next Mystics beat reporter, Jenn Hatfield, is here to break it all down. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today, we'll chat all about what the Washington Mystics look like after the trade deadline, the team's trio of rookies, as well as what lies ahead for the Mystics, starting with the Minnesota Lynx on Friday night. Joining me today is The Next's managing editor and Mystics beat reporter, Jenn Hatfield. So, Jenn, you've been a little bit busy this week. The Mystics have also been busy ahead of the trade deadline. So let's break it down. First off, the team traded Brittany Sykes to the Seattle Storm in exchange for Alicia Clarks, Zia Cooke, and the Storm's 2026 first-round pick. The Mystics then cut Cooke shortly after acquiring her and also cut Sika Kone. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's start breaking it down piece by piece. How does Sykes' departure impact the team?
Yeah, the short answer is it impacts the team in pretty much every way. She was their leading scorer. She was their top perimeter defender. She set the tone as one of only a few veterans on a really young team. And not even just for the young players, but for first-year head coach Sydney Johnson, who knew her from coaching her in 3x3 before. She was kind of a source of comfort for him as he got settled in Washington. This trade, the Mystics lose part of their identity this season. Not their entire identity, but a key piece that they have to kind of rebuild without her now after she was such a critical part in all they did, not only this season, but in the past couple after signing with the team ahead of the 2023 season.
And then Alicia Clarks was on the team in 2021 and 2022, was out with an injury in 2021, played for the team in 2022. So how does her return to the Mystics impact the team? And I say return very loosely. She is coming back, but the team looks very different from the one that she left.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a veteran, so she can at least step in and provide kind of that veteran leadership, an example for the young players, which is invaluable. I mean, having a 3-time WNBA champion on your roster that has tons of young players is amazing for them to learn from her, like really intentionally, and also just in observing how she carries herself, how she takes care of her body, how she supports her teammates. I think she'll be a really good mentor for them, especially defensively. We saw when she was with the Mystics in 2022 especially, but even in 2021, she was really leaving an impression on players like Ariel Atkins and Shatori Walker-Kimbrough with how she approached defensive assignments and dove into film study, was the player who wanted the most video clips I think I've ever heard about. So just that kind of approach, I think, can really benefit a player like Sonia Citron, who's already a really good defender, and who was learning from Brittany Sykes before the trade, and will continue to kind of get that development just with a different kind of lens, because no two players are exactly the same on the defensive end. And then just positionally, I think it's really good for Citron in the sense that Alicia Clarks is a true small forward, can play the 3. And so before the trade, Sonia Citron was the only true 3 on the roster. And so she was playing a lot of minutes, and Sydney Johnson talked about, trying not to overburden her too much, but it's hard when you don't really have a natural backup for her. Emily Engstler tried to play some of those minutes. Sydney Johnson said recently he's kind of moving away from that and letting her play her natural 4 position. But now they have a 3, and there's a question of how many minutes Alicia Clarks will play. She's 38 years old. The Mystics are very leaning into this season of player development. It's unclear how many minutes Sydney Johnson will want to use her, but he has her at that spot. And even as an emergency 4, though, the Mystics are still pretty deep at that spot.
Always good to have options, especially in this year of so many injuries. But now let's get into the second trade. And, you know, we had been hearing that Aaliyah Edwards might be traded. It finally happened Thursday morning. The Mystics traded Aaliyah Edwards to the Sun and got J.C. Sheldon in return, as well as the right to swap Washington's 2026 first-round pick from Minnesota for Connecticut's 2026 first-round pick from New York. Did this trade surprise you?
It did and it didn't. As you mentioned, there had been some talk that Aaliyah Edwards had been on the trade market for the past 5 weeks. So the fact that the Mystics did deal her didn't surprise me. The return for her kind of did surprise me. ESPN's Kevin Pelton has reported that the Mystics were looking for a first-round pick, and I think that was kind of the understood bar for what folks were expecting for her. So to not get an additional draft pick at all, they got a pick swap, but they didn't add any picks to their arsenal, and it was almost just a straight player for player swap. That did surprise me.
And what does it mean for the Mystics in terms of losing Edwards and then also gaining Sheldon?
Yeah, so like I said, almost a straight player for player swap. They were drafted right near each other in 2024. They're both in their second years as pros. Sheldon is a guard. The Mystics don't have much guard depth at all, especially after losing Sykes. So in the short term, Sheldon kind of balances the roster out a little bit better than Edwards did. Edwards was being crowded out at the 4, partly just because Kiki, Iriafen, Shakira, Austin, all those guys are really good, and they just had a lot of forwards to play, but also Aaliyah Edwards not being really a 3-point threat, I think made it a little bit harder to, find her minutes with other players who don't really stretch the court like that. So she was kind of having trouble finding her minutes as much as Sydney Johnson did want to play her and saw value in things that she could bring, especially her offensive rebounding. But, in the long term, it's kind of some question marks. With the way this trade is configured, you're basically betting on Sheldon to become a better player long term than Aaliyah Edwards. And I'm not sure I would personally take that bet. And so reminder, Brittany Sykes was on a contract that is expiring after this year. So the Mystics essentially got something for her rather than risking her potentially leaving in free agency for nothing. Aaliyah Edwards is in a different spot. She's under team control longer on a cheap rookie contract that's going to look even cheaper if the new collective bargaining agreement raises salaries as expected. So it's a different calculus that you're making when trading those two players. And so it'll be interesting to see how this trade kind of looks in the long term when we see how Sheldon develops and how Edwards develops. But in the short term, which is not the Mystics' main priority, their main priority is the long term. But in the short term, it kind of alleviated some roster crunch, gave the Mystics another young guard to try to develop.
Yeah, and, along with all that, we do have over the next 2 years, I believe, more expansion drafts coming. Or really, we just have a lot of expansion drafts coming up in the years to come. That math is not one that's making sense in my head right now, but could that have also played a role in trading away Aaliyah Edwards?
Potentially, but when you think about protecting players, and we don't know the exact rules this year, there might be different numbers of players to protect, but getting Sheldon back, now you're going to have to make basically the same decision that you were going to make with Edwards about, do I protect this player? So it didn't necessarily make their math easier on that front. And I assume that you would want to now protect Sheldon if you just gave up Aaliyah Edwards to acquire her. So I think I think it's kind of a neutral as far as the expansion draft goes. Especially because there were rumors, could you maybe have traded Aaliyah Edwards to the Toronto Tempo, and maybe you get something out of that trade that's equal to or better than what you got here, depending on how desperate the Tempo are to have this really young Canadian Olympian on their roster. So lots of things to consider. General Manager Jamila Weidman hasn't been made available to the media yet as of the time of this recording. So, but hopefully she will be soon, and we'll get to kind of ask her how she weighed those factors.
And, Last thing in segment 1, the Mystics have a lot of cap space and a roster spot open from waiving Sika Kone and Zaya Cook. What do you think they may do with that flexibility?
Yeah, so they could add players on short-term contracts, just kind of test out a young player. If they feel like she fits, keep her around. If not, try someone else. So they could do kind of that work at the margins. They could leave the spot open. They're under no obligation to spend all of their salary cap money. That could get reinvested in the players that they already have on the roster. So it's not clear whether they will seek to fill that roster spot. I mean, rosters in the WNBA are not that big, and I would imagine you would want to at least take a flyer on somebody, but who knows, maybe they really like the group that they have now and won't consider that necessary. But either way, it's kind of tinkering at the margins at this point, I think.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll finish this conversation up about, what the Mystics may look like in the future and also talk about their trio of rookies. Today's episode is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads, so you never miss a customer. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's OpenPhone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. So, Jen, with all of these trades and, having that roster spot open, presumably something they'll fill in the coming days, what does this overall picture mean for the Mystics as they're both within striking distance of a playoff spot, but also have 3 first-round picks for next year?
Yeah, the Sykes trade made it pretty clear that the Mystics are not super prioritizing getting into the playoffs. They made that trade, and that trade basically take away your leading scorer, and the prize of the trade is getting the first-round draft pick back, with no disrespect to Alicia Clarks. But what they were looking for was the first-round draft pick. And so that's a trade that is future-looking much more than it is present-day looking. So if they go on a run and make the playoffs, great. I think that would be a great thing for their young players who don't have much playoff experience, which is nearly all of the roster, especially with Sykes gone. They've got a lot of youth, though Alicia Clarks does bring that playoff experience. But getting that experience, particularly when it's you're not the top team and you're in the playoffs for the first time and there's all this pressure on you, it's kind of good to get that experience when, frankly, maybe you're not expected to do that much and you can kind of just play with nothing to lose. But that's not the front office's priority, and it hasn't been all season. And the fact that the Mystics are in the playoff race right now is kind of a cherry on top of their rebuild. They're not looking to rush it just to make the playoffs this year. They're still focused on the long game of being in championship contention for years and years to come. So they're sitting well in the draft for next season. Obviously, the expansion teams coming in will probably end up pushing their non-lottery picks down in the draft if those expansion teams pick right after the lottery, like Golden State did this year. But the fact remains they've got 3 first-round picks, which either allows them to use them all for the second straight year and find roster spots for all of them, or kind of package some of those into a trade for a bigger piece.
I just looked it up, correcting myself. No expansion draft in 2027. I think that's the only year between next year and 2030 there won't be one. Just wanted to correct myself. But let's get into some of those players that are making this team one to maybe watch in the years to come in Sonia Citron and Kiki Iriafen. I know we talked about them a lot the last time you were on at the end of May, but their performances warrant quite a bit more conversations about them. Since we last talked, they both became All-Stars. Citron competed in the three-point contest. If it's even possible, how can you describe their impact on the team this season?
Yeah, it's been huge. To sum it up in one word, Atlanta Dream head coach Carl Smesko had a nice way of summing this up before his team played the Mystics last week. He basically said, I'm paraphrasing here, but both Citron and Iriafen came in with these expectations because they were the numbers 3 and 4 picks, but they've blown past those expectations. So looking at what they've done, Citron's the second leading scorer on this team. At times, she's taken on the top defensive assignments when Sykes has subbed out, or just to give opposing scorers a different look than what Sykes brings to keep them off balance. Iriafen has carved out the starting spot for herself in a really crowded front court and held on to it all season. She was the WNBA Rookie of the Month in May. She's been great on the glass. She set the Mystics rookie record for double-doubles in a season already. That she set that before the All-Star break, in fact. Which is kind of wild. So for as good as Brittany Sykes was and all that Brittany Sykes did for that team, the Mystics couldn't have won most of the games that they've won so far and exceeded the expectations that the team had coming in without what Iriafen and Citron are doing. One way to look at it is last year the Mystics were a bad rebounding team. If you look at their rebounding rate, which is the percentage of rebounds that they grabbed, they were a bad rebounding team. This year, they're a good rebounding team. And most of the personnel, at least until the trade deadline, is very similar. The main differences are Shakira Austin got healthy and Kiki Iriafen came in. And Iriafen's the leading rebounder. So that's like kind of one statistic that kind of gives you a window into part of, not all of, but part of what she's been doing.
And then how have they developed as the season has gone on, and maybe what are they looking to continue to improve on in the years to come?
Yeah, so Sydney Johnson talked coming out of the All-Star break about how this second half of the season is where scouting reports get more detailed, opponents know you better, and you have to be able to move on from the top thing you wanted to do to the second or the third or the fourth option. And that's something that Citron and Iriafen are working on and getting used to. This whole season has been kind of an adjustment for them, and they've been scouted hard. But now add that Sykes is gone, so everyone bumps up the scouting report a little bit, and they're kind of getting some trial by fire, even with as good as they've been so far. For Citron, she has said, the biggest improvement she thinks she's making is just handling the physicality from defenders. Sydney Johnson's mentioned it a couple times post game. She's getting grabbed a bunch. She has very little freedom of movement, and a lot of the guards around the WNBA have little freedom of movement. So it's not just a her thing, but it's something that she's had to adapt to and kind of learn how to use defenders' physicality against them instead of getting caught up in it. And then for Iriafen, handling double teams, she is not guarded like a typical rookie anymore. And just continuing to play at her own pace. Her position coach, Barb Turner, likes to tell her slow is pro. And that's something that she's really bought into and has seen the results of when she's able to play at that slow, comfortable pace instead of getting sped up. It's kind of funny. Like that was an Elena Deladon special. No one could speed her up. And then now, to see that mentioned under a new Mystics regime is kind of like a full circle moment.
And then Citron and Iriafen aren't the only rookies on the team, though. We also need to talk about Lucy Olsen as well. You recently wrote about her signing with the Townsville Fire of the WNBL in Australia. How has she grown this season, and how does she hope to continue to build this offseason in Australia? And, what does her current teammate, Jade Melbourne, the unofficial mayor of Australia, think of this move?
Yeah, so I'll start with that last part because that's the easiest. And Jade Melbourne is stoked to have Lucy Olsen going to Australia and helped tell her how great of a place Australia was and really sell her on Townsville before she chose to go there. So that should come to no surprise to anyone who knows Jade Melbourne. She's enthusiastic about most things in life, but especially Australia. As for Lucy Olsen, she's been buried on the bench a little bit for the Mystics at guard, except for when there have been injuries and absences. I mean, she played a career high 37-something minutes when the Mystics were down 2 guards in one game, and she's had similar moments where she's been kind of pushed into action just because there is not a ton of depth on the perimeter anymore all of a sudden. And she's done really well in those games, particularly as a scorer when the Mystics really need scoring. So she's shown some of what she can do, but other times she just hasn't really been able to break through in the Mystics rotation. She might get, 1 or 2 stints in the game and play 7 minutes. And it's just not been a ton of time for her to be able to prove herself. She may get more minutes now after the trade deadline. After Sykes was traded, it looked like she was going to get a lot more minutes. And now with Sheldon coming in, it'll be interesting to see kind of how they, share the minutes, divide the minutes there. And obviously Alicia Clarks going to get some minutes too. So we'll see how that goes. But, for her, really, it's been staying ready, being efficient when her number's called, getting better defensively. The coaching staff likes to talk about how much she's improved defensively. And for her, it's been kind of as much about just calming herself when she gets on the court. I was talking to her and she said, at the beginning of the season, she was just so excited to play and she got sped up, back to the slowest pro conversation. She would get so sped up because she was so excited, which I think is probably relatable to a lot of us lower level athletes, shall I say, that you just, you aren't always as poised as you want to be. And so she's kind of figured that out and kind of settled into her role. But in Australia, she's going to be able to play more, most likely, and particularly at the point guard position, which is more of her natural position than the off-ball guard that she's mostly playing in Washington. So she'll get a chance to really develop her skills without having to play, these long European seasons. The Australian season is shorter, a lot easier on the body. So kind of the best of both worlds there to be able to play overseas, but not wear herself out ahead of the next WNBA season.
Well, coming up next, we'll chat about what's ahead for the Mystics, starting with the Minnesota Lynx on Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about the WNBA, baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. It's not too late to bet on which WNBA team you think will win the championship, as well as who will win the regular season MVP and finals MVP. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So the Mystics' next game is Friday, today, against the Minnesota Lynx. What are some keys to the team's success in this game, or what are you looking for, as there could be several new faces or faces still yet to come in for the Mystics?
Yeah, so Kareem Copeland of the Washington Post reported today that Alicia Clarks should be with the team in Minnesota, and JC Sheldon might not arrive until the team's next game in Dallas. So, and, even if Clark is with the team, it's not clear, how much she will be ready to play or able to play, or Sydney Johnson will want to play her for her first game with the team. But I'll be kind of looking to see how that settling in process goes, partly with her, but also just the team getting used to playing without Sykes. They've done so a few times this season when she's been out with injury, but this is kind of a more permanent, like it feels different when your teammate has been traded than when she's coming back shortly from an injury. So just seeing how the team settles into that, settles into new roles, settles into being moved up the scouting report, as I was talking about. I'll kind of be looking for all those things. The Mystics did beat the Lynx in June, and that was a really gritty defensive effort. So they're going to have to look for that again against the Lynx, who are just really good at all facets of the game, really. but they'll have to do it without Sykes, who kind of set the tone a lot with her defending. So definitely curious to see how that plays out.
There's about a month left in the regular season. I think it's about a month and 3 days. What do the Mystics need to do to finish the season the way they want to?
Yeah, so, if you ask Sydney Johnson this question, he's going to talk about playing hard, playing with joy, playing together, teamwork, all those kind of intangible things that he wants to see from this group and he's wanted to see from them from day one. So that's definitely part of it. I think there's also how do they play knowing that the front office has, prioritized the future over this season. They've taken off the leading scorer in exchange for a first-round draft pick and basically said, what can you do now that there's more green space for all of you rookies to play more. The priority is not making the playoffs this year. So on the one hand, there's no pressure. But on the other hand, there may be a little bit to prove, right? You were kind of in position for the playoffs. Can you stay there even through this, if you want to call it adversity that the front office has handed you? So I'm curious to kind of see what the mentality is there. And then I think just continuing to get better to develop individually and as a team. About a week ago, I published a story about their offense, which has struggled but has looked better since the All-Star break. And, obviously taking Brittany Sykes off does not improve your offense. So seeing what they can do offensively, how they can, kind of keep growing the way that they were, but compensate for Sykes not being there, if that makes sense. I'll be curious to see what changes. In particular, she was great at getting to the free throw line. Do the Mystics try to, balance the offense a little more? They are very paint heavy so far this season. So if you take out Sykes' drives to the rim, are you replacing those with harder 3-point shots? Are you getting those drives from elsewhere? Just how much things change basically without Sykes and now without Aaliyah Edwards too.
And one question that I always like to ask, you've answered this plenty of times on the podcast, is there anything or anyone that surprised you so far this season?
A lot has surprised me this season, to be honest. I don't think very many people were expecting the Mystics to enter the All-Star break at 500. That surprised me. And with it, the rookies being ready to contribute from day one and being this good, I mean, even they were shocked to be All-Stars. I don't think really anyone expected both of them to get All-Star nods when they were drafted. We didn't even know whether Kiki Iriafen would play very much, frankly, behind Shakira Austin, Steph Olsen, Aaliyah Edwards, maybe even Emily Ensler. So like Carl Smesko said, they've just shattered expectations. So that's been surprising. I think, these moves at the trade deadline, you could kind of see some of it coming, but the suddenness of a trade kind of always catches you by surprise. I think we've seen some good point guard play from Shug Sutton and Jade Melbourne, which isn't a surprise per se. Melbourne's in her third season. She's still only 22. You expect her to keep getting better. Shug Sutton finally got a chance to be the full-time starter all year long and has kind of flourished in that role, but that's been nice to see. Similarly, Shakira Austin coming back from injury and figuring it out is not surprising, but is something that, we kind of had to wait and see on. And so that's been nice to see her kind of get her groove back. So, the thing with a young team, I feel like as compared to an older team is there's more variance in the expectations. And so they often surprise you a little bit more just because there's more unknowns with them. So that's been kind of a fun part of this season is not quite knowing what to expect, and a lot of times seeing them outperform those expectations.
And then this is both a question for the benefit of the listeners, for something to look forward to, and then also for me, what are some of the stories you're working on right now?
Yeah, so by the time this podcast comes out, you'll have trade analysis from me on both of the deals out at the next, so you can read those. I'm also working on a Kiki Iriafen story, kind of about how great she's been and the Mystics franchise rookie records that she's breaking. So that should be out in the next couple days, depending on how she performs in the games coming up. And then I also have an off-season Ivy League story in the works for a little bit later in the month. So I'll just leave it at that for maximum suspense.
Suspense has happened. Eyeballs emojis are out. Very excited for all of that. Last thing, where can the people find you and your work?
Yeah, so obviously, as always, you can find all of us at thenexthoops.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my Bluesky handle right under my name here. But for those just listening on audio, it's jennhatfield.bsky.social. That's Jen with 2 N's. Yeah, and then find all of us, all of our Locked On shows on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Perfect. Stealing my thunder a little bit at the end there, but we'll allow it. Well, thank you again for joining me today, Jen, and thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to come back tomorrow for our Saturday podcast featuring our WNBA draft crew.